Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I am doing well.
Good.
We're going to talk about international things and a little bit of local stuff.
That's right. We've got it all.
Internationally, there's a major event going on. And I don't know if it's going to be a wrestling event. I wonder who would win an Indian wrestle, between Biden and Putin. I bet a lot of people would put their money on Putin.
I think you're probably right.
But all these matches, these big summits, they're always wrestling matches. What's going to happen, and this has been described in the media as a big event.
Yeah.
It's a little bit early in the administration of Biden, but they're getting together. They had a little confrontation or a little problem with Ukraine, and that's been backed down a little bit, and now they're going to get together. Matter of fact, this conference is at the request of Biden.
Yeah.
He thinks we better get along, except we have to be strong and tough to fulfill the role. And I did read one comment about what Biden would say about the American people electing our president, but I'm not going to say it because it was pretty strong. Because his next statement was, he could be a formidable opponent. So he became more diplomatic. But they will be meeting tomorrow, and the consensus is that they're going to talk about things like nuclear controls, and nobody anticipates that somebody's going to threaten them with a nuke or whatever, but we still invest money in nukes, and I'm sure the Russians do as well. And another one that I cannot see what will happen here, because they do a lot of talking, and I have so little confidence that it's a serious matter, is on climate change.
Oh, yeah.
Are they going to solve that? Whatever they're trying to solve, sometimes I wonder, but it's a politically popular thing to do. And in cybersecurity, that one is less understood by myself, by me. I don't understand all that, but they're going to talk about it because it is a serious problem, and I always would lean toward the least amount of government interference would probably be best. But anyway, those are the proposed reasons why they're having this conference. But there are things like that I would get interested in are the civil liberties. There'll be charges about sanctions. You put sanctions on us, we put sanctions on them. I think we have been the aggressive party on putting on sanctions, but the Russians have responded, in kind, which I don't like, because I always think that leads to more sanctions and more difficulty in getting along with people. So they will have plenty to talk about, but I think Biden is not going to be conventional. He's not going to be in any group type of press conference afterwards.
Yeah.
And some people would say, well, his handlers aren't going to allow him to be there. I don't know the exact reason, but right now, I've always leaned toward not jumping on the bandwagon, because there's, in his more lucid moments, I think, he sounds okay. Why are we going to be putting him away? But he's had some bad episodes, and one thing I've noticed switching, I think it's significant, is during the campaign, it was the right that was really, really hitting hard and showing pictures and did everything in the world. And right now, the people who are expressing, is he slipping and doing this, are the Democrats.
Yeah.
And that to me is a sign that it is more serious, because if that is the case, it is a major, major problem. The best thing for the Republicans to do is lay off. You lose credibility, because it would have to, involve both parties if something has to be done. But right now, I imagine there are some Democrats who are a little bit concerned about this meeting, because just this week we did see some photos of him sort of like struggling, but his wife's been helping him out under these conditions. But anyway, I know you keep up with a lot of this in anticipation why we're having this and what will come of it. But tomorrow we will certainly be paying close attention for how the debate goes.
I think anyone who spends more than 3 seconds watching Kamala Harris talk understands why the Democrats should be worried, because she's clearly not up to the job. Biden has not impressed people. Obviously, we can go into that a little bit later. But it is kind of a strange summit because there's really nothing at stake. There's not a big treaty to sign. There's nothing specific. They generally said we want to talk about having a more stable and predictable relationship, which would be a benefit if something comes out of it. But the backdrop to this whole thing, Dr. Paul, what I think spurred this on, and you mentioned it in your opening, which is that Biden did call Putin and ask for this meeting. It wasn't the other way around. And the way I see it is that Team Biden, and remember, Team Biden in foreign policy is made up of Tony Blinken, who was heavily involved in the 2014 U.S. overthrow of the elected president of Ukraine, and Victoria Nuland, who was literally giving people cookies who are about to overthrow their government. These are the two most powerful people in foreign policy in the U.S. right now. Biden team thought they were going to score a quick and early victory in Ukraine. They started shipping aggressive weapons over there. It was Secretary of Defense Austin, Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, wink, wink, green light to Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, saying, hey, we're all for supporting the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, the full Ukraine. And so it was really seen very clearly as a green light for Zelensky to go and take back Donbass and take back Crimea. And in fact, he issued an executive order, Zelensky did, saying it is now our official policy to take these two places back by force. And then strange things happened. Russia moved 75,000 heavily armed, 5 divisions, 75,000 heavily armed soldiers onto the border. And they suggested that the U.S. do not enter the Black Sea with its warships. And all of a sudden, Biden and NATO and Team Biden, more importantly than Biden, realized that they had something on their hands that they could not control. They couldn't get a counter to these 75,000 troops quick enough. It was impossible. So what happened a couple of days later, that's when Biden called Putin and said, hey, let's have a talk. And in fact, at the NATO summit this week, it was made pretty clear that the U.S. is not that impressed with Ukraine anymore. Biden said, well, Ukraine and NATO, I don't know, they got to crack down on corruption, they've got to meet some criteria, and this is an about face from Team Biden early on.
Well, I think it's not a tragedy for the United States. NATO is weak, and this is a sign it's weaker than it was. Robert Taft said we should never be in it because it would engage us in European affairs when we shouldn't be engaged in it. But anyway, it reminds me a little bit about the Cuban crisis because that was serious. The Soviets had missiles in Cuba. There was a draft at that time, which I remember very clearly. And all of a sudden, the confrontation ended. You know, it was like a 3-day deal and boom, Khrushchev said, we're taking the missiles out, we're going home. And that's because I think geography still is important. That's a long supply line to defend Cuba. And if it came to that type of an activity, and you can think if some hostilities broke out in Ukraine, you know, the Russians had the tremendous advantage of this. So all of a sudden, you know, the Europeans had to say, well, we are not going to fight you right now, some other day, and that's why they've decided to do it. It was a very practical decision. That doesn't mean they're going to love each other, because I think they've been fighting over that for a long time, and we've talked about it. And the position that I've had, and I think you agree, is that the further away we stay from this, and if Hillary, her efforts that started us up to be very much involved in Ukraine. So that's the problem, is our intervention, and you never know when it's going to stop. And this is an effort that we have to pay attention to, but I'd like to de-escalate it, even though it's not a crisis between, like there was talk, you know, in 1962 with a nuclear exchange. It's not anything like that, but it's still the kind of thing that we should try to avoid, because I don't like all that talk about sanctions, and we are the promoter of sanctions, but sanctions get retaliated against. Others do the same thing, and we've come to the conclusion that the freer the trade, the better chance we have for the world to live in peace.
The problem with the U.S. foreign policy establishment is that, A, it's deeply, deeply corrupt. And it's also an echo chamber where they believe their own myths. They adopt their own slogans, which are not that different from the old Soviet slogans. Very meaningless, the wooden language of Soviet bumper sticker mentality, deeply corrupt. So they'll repeat things like, well, Russia and China have to play along with the rules-based order. We must go there from a position of strength. And here's a great example. Here's Kurt Volker, one of the highest lights in the U.S. foreign policy establishment. He was the U.S. ambassador to NATO. As an aside, I actually knew him. He was a lowly embassy staffer in Budapest when I lived there, and now he's risen to great heights. And this is an example of how you rise to great heights, which is you be a huge hawk and be the favorite of the military-industrial complex. Put up this first clip, if you will. This is Volker's advice on what Biden should do at the summit. There can be no accommodation unless and until Russian aggression ends and it returns to the rules-based order. This is Volker. This is absolute classic Soviet bumper stickerism. Put on the next one if you can. This is a little bit deeper down in his article, and I won't read this. But he said, for the U.S., therefore, the best possible outcome is not one of modest agreements and a commitment to predictability, but one of a lack of agreements altogether. Success is confrontation. This is the deep corruption of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, RD. It doesn't matter who it is. But, Dr. Paul, something amazing happened earlier this year, and we've talked about it on the show, is that when Blinken was sitting down with his Chinese counterpart, Yang Jiechi, he was going to pull the same game. Rules-based order, you do what we say, position of strength. And all of a sudden the Chinese foreign minister shot back and said, don't lecture us about the rules-based order. Look at how you've been invading countries, bombing countries, destroying countries. We haven't done that. We don't have an aggressive foreign policy. So basically, look in the mirror. And of course, the U.S. foreign policy team was dumbfounded, dumbstruck. Nobody's ever talked to them that way, and they didn't know how to respond. So the real reason for the summit is the U.S. is trying to pull Russia away from China because the U.S. now realizes that the big bad guy is China, but Russia and China united is too dangerous, it's too big to bite off and chew. So they're trying to break them up. The Russians understand this. The U.S. has spent, sorry, one last thing. The U.S. has spent all this time pushing the two of them together with sanctions, like you said earlier.
It does the opposite.
It does the opposite. So.
But, you know, I never mind it when they point out an inconsistency on our part, even though the less of that we have, the better. But it makes a point that if we're charging them with certain things and we're doing it here at home, we lose credibility, and I think they have every right in the world to do it, and maybe the condition would change. But here is the sentence. Biden warned on Monday that if Navalny died while in Russian custody, Moscow's relationship with the rest of the world would further deteriorate. It's a bit of a threat.
Yeah.
You know, don't do that. And of course, that's a complex issue, and who's most righteous on that is up to them to decide, not American president and not the American Congress, and putting on more sanctions because we don't like it. Because what about how we treat some of our people like Edward Snowden and Assange?
Yep.
And what about the people who have been locked up now for months since the insurrection? Insurrection, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Trouble is there was no insurrection. Yeah. They couldn't find even a pistol.
Yeah.
You know. So anyway, that I think that continues back and forth, and that's why I think sort of a more neutral position on this when people have problems, and I don't think it does any good. You just pointed out it backfires on them a lot of times. And if it could be done more by a country finding out how to set a standard that people would say, those Americans are doing pretty good, and there was a time that we were looked up to a lot more than we are today. That if we're a freer country and a wealthier country and a friendlier country, why wouldn't people say, that's a pretty good idea?
Yeah.
But right now, I don't think we have that reputation. I think our reputation is going in the other direction, and then you do hear these sharp answers. And people shouldn't say, well, they're just evil, whether it's China or Russia, and say, oh, they're monsters, they're Soviet-type communists, and they're evil. and they have their problems, but I'll tell you what, we have a few, and our moral responsibility is more for ourselves. That's like individuals have responsibility for themselves rather than telling their neighbors how to make sure they have a perfect household next door or down the street. It doesn't work. So I think setting examples is a good goal.
You know, the whole 4 years of the Russiagate hoax, to the left, to the Democrats, seemed like a relatively cost-free way of getting rid of this bad orange president. But what it's done is it's created kind of an intellectual prison that the foreign policy establishment is now trapped in. Because no matter what happens, if Biden were to somehow pull something out of the hat, have pretty decent agreement with Putin, and they start moving in the right direction, what's going to happen? Or is Trump and his people going to say, oh, this is a good move, this is what I wanted to do all along before you were hassling me? No. And we already know this from Pompeo, and Michael Tracy on Twitter pointed out that Mike Pompeo is warning and threatening if Biden has any kind of breakthrough. He said that the Trump administration reasserted American strength to thwart Putin's dream of a restored Russian empire. But Biden has already begun squandering this leverage. They actually believe these things, and that distorts their ability to make rational decisions and conduct rational foreign policy.
It's always a goal for power that I think has been history's evidence that people are seeking power and they're seeking wealth. But in a situation like this, most of them already have the wealth in both countries. The leaders end up very wealthy, no matter what their professed concerns are for the people and to help the people. The wealth is a big deal. We certainly saw that with the skirmishes that went on with lockdown for the COVID virus. I mean, it had to do with crony capitalism and a lot of other things. I did have another one. Do you have another statement on this?
No, because it was a great segue. Speaking of the coronavirus.
Yeah, there you go. I didn't realize what I was doing there.
That was perfect.
But there was a little episode yesterday. The headline will tip us off on what's going on. Huh? Did you miss any paychecks? Former Biden advisor roasted after Americans saying Americans should have sacrificed more. That was the problem. And that word sacrifice really gets to me, because I can't recall how many times during my campaigning efforts that to have a free country, do such and such, you need to sacrifice. I happen to believe, in my religious teaching, I was told that sacrifices were ancient history. You didn't have to sacrifice animals or people. So I don't like the word sacrifice. And you don't have to sacrifice liberty. People say, well, Ron, you're wrong on this, because after 9/11, you had to sacrifice. That's why you had to invite the TSA. Oh, there's a virus out there. That's why you have to sacrifice. But this individual that came up with this, the American people should have sacrificed. We know darn well that individual didn't sacrifice a darn thing. He just was looking for more power and authoritarianism.
This guy is really the hypocrite of the week, of the year. He's a really bad person. Let's put up the next clip. Andy Slavin, he was the biggest hysterical person on COVID. We got to lock everything down. We know lockdowns didn't work. They never say they're sorry. In fact, they always double down. Biden's COVID czar, Andy Slavin, says the pandemic wouldn't have been as bad if Americans had sacrificed a little bit more. He said avoiding social interaction requires a certain amount of sacrifice and change. And the response to this on Twitter, this clip was amazing. Let's go through them quickly, because we saw this from RT, but these tweets are great. The loss of 40% of small businesses and a year and a half of children's education is not enough sacrifice for these people. Next one, real quick. How much did Andy sacrifice? Did he lose a business in his life savings? Did any of his loved ones commit suicide because of being locked down? Did he miss any paychecks? Next one real quick. Hey, this is the one. Ex-Goldman Sachs and McKinsey employee, now mysteriously Biden COVID advisor, Andy Slavin, says Americans didn't sacrifice enough during the lockdown. Here's a guy who spent it's only June. He spent just a very few months as Biden's top COVID advisor. And he stepped down to, guess what, Dr. Paul? Release a book on the coronavirus. So he's cashed in. He spent the entire year in luxury because he wasn't locked down. And now he's pulling out as quickly as he can to capture, to take advantage of the last little bits of this coronavirus to make some more money.
It's too bad that Fauci, he did the same thing. He wrote a book But he didn't leave. He's still on the payroll. Why doesn't he just go away? He wrote this book, and it's more of the same thing. I think that the word that we should use more often is victims, because the people who are suffering, it isn't that they didn't suffer enough from their sacrifice. They're victims of this bad policy. This whole thing, the lockdown policy, and how many children have been victims. I am totally convinced that the health of this country deteriorated with lockdown and was not beneficial. And that's not to disparage anybody who got sick and had a virus and all. It's just that it was totally wrong. Most people are recognizing this now, that there was overreaction in the wrong direction. And when it comes to children especially, and compare it to how they treated people in nursing homes, collective management is just not the way to do it. You have to have a different way of operating with government and also with medical care. So that to me is a real tragedy. And for him to say people need to sacrifice, it's part of this. You got to sacrifice to be free.
Yeah.
And you mean you are not going to sacrifice to make sure people don't get sick? No, I don't want to be victimized by you and make people a lot sicker and cause the problems that you have and ruin a whole generation of young people at the rate they were going.
Well, speaking of hypocrisy and corruption, Dr. Ball, here's just a little clip that I saw this morning I wanted to put up, if we can put up this next one, because it goes right in with what we're saying. Trump's FDA commissioner in talks about a job at Moderna. Okay, this is Stephen Hahn. Alex Berenson, who we follow closely, who's very good, he has a good answer. Are you kidding me? Stephen Hahn, who has FDA commissioner, okayed the Moderna and Pfizer mRNA vaccine in weeks, despite serious questions about trial design and side effects, is now negotiating for a job at Moderna's largest investor. And then he goes on to say, if this happens, it means the two most recent FDA commissioners will both be on the payroll of companies that benefit financially from the mRNA vaccines. Nothing to see here, folks. Pretty amazing.
Right. Wanted to talk a little bit about Fairfax.
Yeah.
Their episode up there was a teacher who gave a speech or with a student at the graduation ceremony, but it was terrible. It was down the line of cultural Marxism, all Marxism stuff. White supremacy was destroying the world, and she was a Muslim, but she was advising jihad. She explained that jihad is really friendly. It's like Sunday school, and but her tone and the whole work was very, very vicious. And even our friend Jonathan Turley lives in, I think he lives in Fairfax. The way he wrote it sounded like he even attended there, and he listened to it carefully, and he had one point in it that really bugged him. He says there's been a great deal of controversy over the graduation address by Fairfax County School Board member, that's who it was, Obra Omesh, yes, to the Justice Department School. He says the big thing that bothered him here, really struck him, is that admitting libertarian court with me was the third danger that she warned about was excessive individualism. Don't be a person.
Yeah.
You're just a cog in a wheel. But the one thing they never answer, in a way, voluntarism and having units and, communities and churches and families and all that, there's nothing against that. But she was making the point that excessive individualism was what destroys the country. But they never answer the question, who runs things after that?
Yeah.
They're always the ones, like the one that was running Black Lives Matter. She had 3 houses, millions of dollars, and she was worried about poor people.
Yeah.
And nobody owns the property except she controlled it, and it was hers, probably in her name and the whole work. But no, every time they attack somebody else for some reason, some racial reason or whatever, they're the ones who are probably the most guilty. And I think that was what happened, and that's probably what aggravated Jonathan Turley on this, because he was really annoyed that they were so blunt.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so blunt. Don't be an individual. Well, that sort of contradicts mostly of what Western civilization, encouraged, responsibility, and being an individual. And then the rest, if you want groups, everything is voluntary.
Yeah.
Go to the group you like the most. Don't let the government decide what group you belong to. But here, this is authoritarianism. You belong to this. You're white. You're black. You do this. And if they can punish somebody, or if they can reward a group of people, believe me, it is authoritarianism. It will work out. Won't work out. It'll just lead to more hostilities.
It will, and it really is interesting because Fairfax County and next door in Loudoun County really are the battleground for the cultural Marxism, for this critical race theory and everything we're seeing over and over these school districts. I'm of two minds, Dr. Paul, because on one hand I would say, which is what we did when we lived in Fairfax County, hey, don't even take part, homeschool, get out of it. But you have to kind of admire the parents who go down there and say, hey, we're paying for these schools. We're not going to let people like you bully us around. So I think there's a good case to be made. I was really happy with a quote that Professor Turley put in his talk from, I know this is one of your favorite films, but Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. And the quote is great, it's very moving. This is from people who know what it's like when excessive individualism is taken away. Here's Pasternak. The main misfortune, the root of all evil to come, was the loss of confidence in the value of one's own opinion. People imagined that it was out of date to follow their own moral sense, that they must all sing in a chorus and live by other people's notions that were being crammed down everybody's throat. Does not that sound like our last year of COVID?
What they're stating here is so crystal clear, the opposite of what liberty is all about. Their whole position, collectivism, and this whole rejection of the individual, and yet they use all the tools that have been created. If they're going to use money and fancy houses, they just want control. It's just greed and avarice, and they're out there and they want to control things, but they have no more interest. And they admit it.
Yeah.
They're interested in freedom. No, freedom is something that is individual. You don't give freedom to a group of people. You give freedom to individuals, and the individuals should be able to come together in any way they want. It's freedom of choice to do what they want. And I will argue that this whole idea of freedom of choice bring people together, because if you understand freedom, you should be able to bring progressives and moderates and everybody else, because freedom can be used any way you want.
Yeah.
So if you have different religious beliefs or different social beliefs, different sexual beliefs or whatever, as long as you're not hurting people, you can do it. So it's really wide open. But what they can't stand is voluntarism.
Yeah.
They cannot stand that the individual is permitted to voluntarily deal with their lives, and and they're pretty blunt on this. That we don't want people to be individuals. That's the crime of the century.
Yeah. Well, I put together a little slideshow for you, Dr. Paul, and for our viewers, and I know you haven't seen it before because I want to get your reaction. But this, I think, I'm trying to capture the absolute hypocrisy of the G7 summit, and it is so clear. It was all over Twitter yesterday, so this is not my original idea. I can't take credit for it, but my gosh, is it not glaring? Let's put up this next clip. Cameras on. Everyone is social distanced. Look at that. Cameras are on. 30 minutes later, click the next one. Cameras off. They're all at a party. The exact same people, all at a party. Do the next one. And here's, they can shake hands now. They could only elbow bump when the cameras are on. The next one, please. Cameras on top. They're all sitting apart. 30 minutes later, they're all very close. Next one, please. And this is the one that gets me. For the cameras, here's Biden and Boris Johnson, the buffoon, bumping their elbows together. We don't want to give each other COVID. And then when the cameras are off, look at that. Camera on, camera off. It's the hypocrisy is just, Dr. Paul, absolutely stunning.
And that's why they're in politics.
That's why they're in politics.
And they do well, and the people respond. And that's the sad part, is the people respond, and we've said it many times, they respond not because they don't know what's going on, but they could get frightened.
Yeah.
People are well enough informed, and they want to believe their government. The government comes along and they lie. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's
People
shocking.
lie. They'll lie us into wars overseas, and they'll lie us into wars here at home. They'll lie us into wars of viruses they can hardly even identify, and intimidate people. And then they can lie into the people that said, well, what you need is to stay at home. Don't go to work. There's no need to work, even though there's jobs out there. You just do that, and we'll send you money to stay at home. You figure, do they really think that? They're capable of it, to do it deliberately.
Well, here's my final word. We're still working on getting those tickets available for 2 RPI conferences. And bonus round, Dr. Paul, we're going to do a third event. We're going to do another scholar seminar for young people, because our mission really is focused toward young people. So we're going to do another scholar seminar. So we're looking for bright young people. We'll put out some information on that. Lots of stuff happening for the Ron Paul Institute over the summer. We're super excited. By tomorrow, we'll have a way to start getting involved.
Very good. Sounds like you're very busy.
A little bit, yeah.
So, excuse me. Once more, I do want to thank our viewers for tuning in once again and providing the support that we need, and appreciate very much. I do think that it goes back and forth. It's driven by fear, and that whether it's domestic or foreign, there are problems. But ultimately, it is understanding of an idea. And the people who we can't stand because we think their ideas are absolutely wrong, when they go and attack the whole principle of an individual, you have to attack an awful lot, because I think we're individuals when we're born. I've seen newborns, and they're very, very individualistic, and they have to be guided, by parents and love. And then there is a maturity than that. But that isn't the case. People now are supposed to be collective and just working in a group, but somebody always has control. And that is what it is. They want total control, and they want to be in charge of the money, and they want to turn the people into idiots, because too often they say, well, and they'll tell me it to my face, well, I sort of agree with you on this, but people are too stupid. So we have to do it. We know what's right. Well, I tell you what, we're trying hard to reverse that attitude, because I do believe in individualism, and I believe the imperfection of man, and that there will be mistakes. But why take somebody who is capable of making mistakes and put them ahead of the CDC or some other agency of government? That doesn't make any sense at all. But I do want to thank you once again for tuning in, and please return to the Liberty Report soon.